we've contributed to a 10,000-fold increase in the rate of extinction on the planet over the last 50 years.
Wow.
And so that 10,000x on extinction events of species is what we need to escape, because right now we're on line to go extinct over this next 100 years or so at our current biologic collapse rate. And so we're all addicted to our work or to substances, or for this, we're missing the bigger point. We only have one human problem. It's nature deficit disorder. And that nature deficit disorder has led to this decline of metabolic function because we kept separating ourselves with our technologies from nature itself. We need to get away from this external pursuit of health, and we need to become internal generators.
Unfortunately, we have walked a journey that has made us sick, made our planet sick as well. But I think if we can all come together and turn it around, then we can have a different outcome for sure.
You have to be in community to really fundamentally heal.
Wow.
And it's so powerful when we empower each other, not as doctors and nurses, but as a small community. What if we could heal each other by being witness to one another?
My next guest is guaranteed to blow your mind. Get ready to rethink everything, how we think about health and wellness and life and our planet, how it's all connected, and so much more. Please welcome Zach Bush, Dr. Bush, to the show. He's a specialist in internal medicine, endocrinology, and hospice care, but he is better known and internationally recognized as an educator and thought leader on the microbiome as it relates to health, disease, and food systems. He founded Seraphic Group and the nonprofit Farmers Footprint to develop root cause solutions for human and ecological health. His passion for education reaches across many disciplines, including topics such as the role of soil and water ecosystems in human genomics, immunity, and gut and brain health. His education has highlighted the need for a radical departure from chemical farming and pharmacy, and his ongoing continued efforts are providing a path for consumers, farmers, and mega industries to work together for a healthy future for the people and our planet. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Zach Bush to the show. I am beyond thrilled to have you on the show. I have admired your work for years, and I think you are such an instrumental voice in where we need to head in terms of health and planetary health and how to bring those two ideas together. So welcome.
Thank you so much.
Can't wait to have you here. So there's so many things I want to talk to you about. But before we jump in, maybe just for somebody brand new into our space of holistic health and planetary health, maybe just give us a little blip of how you went from MD physician, just like me, into this space. What was the spark? What happened? And then we'll jump in from there.
Beautiful. There may have been a seed planted before it all happened, but the seed was working with a group of international midwives, birthing babies in the Philippines when I was very young, and I was heading into engineering school, and then took a year off and headed to the Philippines and had this experience there for 6 months. And that once you've seen what you see, you can't unsee it in kind of the moment. And so suddenly I was like, engineering looked like something that was going to be boring compared to what I had just witnessed. And so that phenomenon of birth is such an unspoken miracle and something that's overlooked, I think, in our society radically these days. And the opportunity to kind of play in that space of the generation of life, the witnessing of life coming into the world, was something I just couldn't escape. And so it took me from thinking I didn't like school and wasn't a good student to something where I was like ready to apply myself in any way, I think. And so I went from kind of an average student to trying to get through pre-med and all of that, and eventually into medical school. Slippery slope there into thinking, since I was mostly a blue collar kid growing up, building houses, cars, things like that, I thought I would be a surgeon because I was decent working with my hands and tools, and that seemed obvious. And then somehow, for some unknown reason, surgery was just profoundly boring for me. I found myself just a lot of standing around, waiting for something, waiting for something to happen. And so instead, I ended up in the completely opposite direction, was really more of the intellectual pursuit of understanding of human systems. So I was in internal medicine initially for 3 years, doing hospital-based medicine in the ICUs, and then realized I was kind of chasing the wind in the ICU setting, even though we had, what seemed like the power of God to restart hearts and, pull people back from the brink of death and all this stuff that's in the adrenaline moment seems powerful.
Yeah.
You find out that you're kind of just doing like end stage symptom management of a disease that started 25 years ago, and you can't really change the disease now because it's too far down the road. So that after a few years, I realized I need to get further up that river and see if I can have an effect on my patients. It's maybe more meaningful than, kind of the revolving door of ICU care until they die. And in that journey found endocrinology and metabolism. And endocrinology is the study, of course, of the hormones and the way in which they coordinate the body. And most endocrinologists go down that side of the field, but the second half of the specialty is really overlooked, I think, which is metabolism, which is the study of mitochondria. And that became my fascination. And so I developed a bunch of biomedical research in mitochondrial dynamics in cancer cells. And through that, I had the opportunity to develop a new chemotherapy in vitamin A compounds that interact with the mitochondria. And not knowing it then, but that was my slippery slope into the world of the microbiome, which was really coming of age. This was 2005 to 2010 timeframe. And so genomics was starting to really change our understanding of what it meant to be human at the time. And it was changing our understanding of disease in general. Up until that time, and unfortunately still the dogma in the industry is that a carcinogen is something that breaks DNA strands like radiation. What was coming in through genetics, though, at the time was the sudden realization that actually you can predict which cancer somebody's going to get by a change in the microbiome of their gut. And that just didn't fit anybody's model of what cancer was.
Well, we're still not really talking about that, honestly. I mean, I think you were ahead of your time back then, but you're still ahead of your time even 10, 15 years later, I would say. So, that idea, and it's so funny, too, because I almost thought I was going to be an ICU doctor. I loved that, the procedure, the adrenaline part of it, but it gets old and you realize you're only having so much of an impact on your patients, and then endocrinology and metabolism was fascinating as well, because you are interconnecting, you are thinking about the body as a whole, not thinking about it in one isolated sphere. But so because not everybody watching or listening may understand the mitochondria. So talk about the mitochondria. It's the powerhouse of the cell. It's providing energy. You're finding the connection between the mitochondria and the soil, not the soil microbiome, but our microbiome.
Our soil,
Our soil. So can you wind that together for us?
Yeah. I think, again, unfortunately, it hasn't changed in the education system, but we're taught that the mitochondria are the powerhouse of the human cell, which makes it sound like a part of the human cell or something human, when in fact it's non-human, and it's one of the highest technologies that the earth has produced is the mitochondria. Maybe for a second I need to back up actually and just define life, because then mitochondria make a lot more sense. Because
everyone's wait, what do you mean? I've got non-human stuff in me. What's happening here? So,
yeah, exactly. So you're full of aliens, which is actually very much the truth. So life is, in its simplest definition, as far as I've come to distill it now, is life is a concentration of light energy.
Yes.
And it takes an enormous amount of light per cubic centimeter to generate enough energy to coordinate the materialization of a particle out of vacuum space. And so Einstein showed us that light can either be a particle or a wave, and it can be at the same time, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to anybody's brain. But what he's saying basically is energy in the form of light, which is the energetics of the universe. That electromagnetic field that we could call light is in this constant vibrational frequency expression of itself all over the universe. And if it's witnessed, if there's something that is still enough to witness the photon of energy, then it will become a particle. And so this is called the observer effect in physics. But everything is in wave until it is seen, and then suddenly it can become particle. And to become particle, when light becomes particle, you're basically demanding an enormous amount of energetic exchange or transformation. And for that, to get something as complicated as a bacteria, you need an enormous amount of sunlight concentrated before you get there. So physics, the brightest thing it does is a sun or a star. Biology, the single cell bacteria or fungi has to concentrate 1,000 times brighter that sunlight before you can have enough energy to manifest a single cell. And so that gives you a sense of just how extraordinary it is that a cell exists. It takes a lot of technology in nature to create that much light energy in a cubic centimeter. And the way in which that was done, as life emerges, is through fermentation. So bacteria and fungi, you've maybe made yogurt before, maybe you've made sauerkraut. That's a process of using the microbes in the air to start generating energy through the fermentation of the carbohydrates, for example, in a piece of cabbage to become sauerkraut. So the fermentation is this process of liberating energy from other cellular forms of life. And before you can get cellular life, you have to have some molecular energy. And the way in which molecular energy happens on this planet, at least, is through carbon. And so CO2 in the atmosphere is the energy potential of the planet. And so all this demonization of CO2 right now is a big problem for our scientific understanding of the world. But nonetheless, CO2, we all need to come to terms with the fact that this is actually the bloodstream of life. And if you don't have CO2 in the atmosphere, you don't have life. The more CO2 in the atmosphere, the more potential for life the planet has. Our atmosphere has very little CO2 in it. 0.04% of the atmosphere is actually CO2. Most of it's nitrogen, oxygen, a few other gases. And so CO2 is this sliver of the pie of the breathed air of this planet, but it's enough to help store sunlight. And so the way that's done is through the green things behind us. A green leaf produces chlorophyll, and that chlorophyll takes CO2 and stores a photon of sunlight between the two carbons. And so two CO2 molecules start to chain together to store sunlight. And a glucose or carbohydrate or a fatty acid are long chains of CO2 built in these long carbon strings that we would call sugar or fat.
You're taking me back to med school biochemistry class right now.
Exactly.
So I'm remembering all these formulas. I'm like, oh my gosh, this was the bane of my existence.
Yeah.
But yes,
and sadly,
I'm completely following, but having a little bit of trauma as you speak.
Sadly,
too.
that's what happens is as doctors, we forget that.
Yeah.
And so you ask a typical doctor, what is life? And vague answers.
Right.
Because we forget that first few days of training, and then it's dwarfed by 8 years of pharmaceutical training after that. But the actual biology is not understood well, and therefore doctors behave the way they do. Therefore, I behaved the way I did, as I thought I needed to poison the cells to get them healthy, and such an insane metrics of chemotherapy, for example. So there's this slippery slope that happens if you forget this. So as a society, as a human species, we need to remember that light is the code of life, and the biology of the planet, namely the green things on the earth, are what store that sunlight in a way in which it can be liberated by the mitochondria. And so the human cell has no way to take that carbohydrate or fat and turn it into energy. The human cell lacks that ability because this human cell can't do fermentation. The bacteria and fungi do that. But a multicellular organism has let go of its ability to do fermentation, and it is now relying on the microbes to do that. And so the gut of an earthworm, a wolf, or a human is the soil systems that start that process of metabolizing potential energy, and then they process all of the nutrients that would be in your food into the glucose, fatty acids, and other compounds that will become the carbon delivery to the mitochondria. So the bacteria live inside your gut, and actually now we know there's microbes that live in every single organ system, in your prostate, in your breast, in your brain. You have microbiome throughout your whole body. So you're an organic garden of microbes that are producing energy or potential energy for you. And then that gets put into the bloodstream, eventually getting inside of a human cell where the mitochondria live. Mitochondria are tiny little bacteria that live inside of human cells. And that's, again, what wasn't taught to us well in medical school.
No, I always thought of it as an engine, like an organelle. Exactly. Yeah, that was the word that was used.
Yeah, so this is a little organelle that lives inside of you. And maybe they taught us that because we're too narcissistic as a species to believe that we rely on anybody else. But there actually is no human mechanism of creating energy for human life. It's entirely done by these microbes. And so a tiny little bacteria called an archaea absorbed a methane-producing bacterium around 3 billion years ago, if the fossil record is correct. So around 3 billion years ago, you have this massive innovation in biology, moving from the ability for fermentation to produce that breakdown of carbon to release the sunlight into mitochondria. And so this new innovation of the bacterium that we would call mitochondria allowed for respiratory digestion or breakdown of that carbon chain, which was 10 times more efficient than fermentation. So there was an explosion of light energy per cubic centimeter, and that suddenly enabled multicellular life to occur. It takes 1,000 times more energy than sunlight per cubic centimeter to produce single cell, but if you start to think about a human body that's got dozens of organ systems with roughly 70 trillion human cells that are interacting with 14 quadrillion mitochondria and 1.5 quadrillion bacteria of 40,000 different species, the system is so freaking complex that it dwarfs the complexity of what we would think of like a city center. Mm-hmm. And yet you've seen it yourself. If you go out to the country, somebody can have a solar panel in their little house and all is well. You go into the city, now you need nuclear power plants and everything else because you are requiring so much energy because there's so much community. So the more complex the interactions, the more energy you need to maintain that system. So the multicellular life of a human requires a lot. So the mitochondria are how we become human ultimately. And this is where we, went sorely wrong in our addiction to chemical, management of our systems, because almost every chemical we use, whether it be in the pharmaceutical industry at the bedside as a doctor or in the farm fields of producing our food, we've become reliant on these small molecule chemicals that function as antibiotics. And so the antibiotics that came out of the 1940s with penicillin quickly grew into not just lots of antibiotics for humans, but by the 1950s, antibiotics for our soils and crops. And so we started using herbicides and pesticides widespread throughout the globe, really, by the 1960s. And this was called the Green Revolution, because we found that if we dump chemicals into soil, like urea, nitrogen, and nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium fertilizers that are drawn out of fossil oil, we were suddenly seeing fields just grow things like never seen before. So we thought, well, this is amazing. We're going to feed everybody.
Right.
What we didn't realize was that when you reduce soil down to basically an engine for nitrogen and phosphorus, you start to chew through the carbon reservoir. And so we started destroying the carbon reservoir of our soils in the 1960s. And in that, we sterilized the whole planet. And so 97% of the world's farmable soils are now depleted or severely depleted of carbon metabolism. And so this whole process of storing light energy is being undermined. And so now every plant in the world is deficient in energy compared to where we were in the 1960s. And so for this, we're seeing human disease emerge because there's a lack of energy to maintain these complex systems of life.
So lots of questions. So first of all, when someone talks about a carbon footprint, right? We're trying to reduce our carbon footprint. We're trying to be sustainable. We're trying to be all these things. But then you're saying carbon dioxide is sort of the essential life force or life energy. How do you reconcile those two ideas?
Well, you actually have to throw out the first idea completely. There is no negativity to having a carbon footprint. What is negative is if in creating that carbon footprint, you destroy biodiversity. And so if as an oil company, you're destroying ecosystems to go dig your oil out of the ground, then you're a problem. But if you are, taking a look at, step back and start to measure biodiversity as a metric for life and human impact on it, you get a much more accurate vision of where we need to go as industries. When you just demonize a single molecule like carbon, CO2 in the atmosphere, now you let everybody else cheat or be hidden behind this one demon of CO2. And so CO2, is easy to then blame on the oil companies. And in global politics, we politicized climate change in the 1990s and 2000s. Al Gore's famous film, Inconvenient Truth, demonized carbon, I believe, for a political reason, not so much for a scientific rationale. Even then, we understood that CO2 is actually a tiny contributor to, the extinction processes that we see going on. But it was a very convenient reductionist measurement of a political outcome, basically. And what you see is most of the wealth in the world under our current energy systems is held in non-Western countries. And so most of the oil in the world is in North Africa, the Middle Eastern peninsula of the UAE and Saudi Arabia and the like, all of the nations there within that peninsula, and then into Siberia, North India, Siberia, North China. That's 1/3 of the planet's surface that's all under desert right now. And it's those desert countries that have these huge oil reserves under the ground, because that's actually a carbon cycle. Deserts go into grasslands every 20,000 years, and then the grasslands go into savanna into forest back into desert. And when it desertifies, that silica has so much basically energy force, because the sun hitting silica is like basically what you would think of as a superconductor. And so it turns that old soil into oil very quickly. And so we build these deep oil reserves through the cycle of the desert back into grasslands, back into desert again. And so when you then look at geopolitics that are driven largely by energy systems, and the dominant energy on the planet is oil, the Western countries it was an advantageous thing to demonize oil, because it disenfranchised economically the oil producing countries of the world. And so it was the West's way of penalizing the wealth of these regions, I think, and trying to level the playing field in a field where you're simply disadvantaged because your resources under your earth don't produce as much oil as somebody else's. And so I think that's subconsciously or probably very consciously part of the agenda that was behind politicizing this. And when you step back and really look at the extinction event that we're in right now, you realize it's not oil and oil, companies that are killing the earth. It's chemical agriculture companies coming out of the U.S. and Germany that are killing the planet.
Oh, wow.
And so we have hidden Western technology behind this carbon story while we poison the earth with our chemical industries and our small molecule chemicals. Nobody's penalizing anybody for that. Nobody's getting, their wrist slapped or getting penalized or having biodiversity, offset requirements for a company that's spraying antibiotics at 4 billion pounds a year into our soil system.
So is climate change real? Like, how would you define climate change?
Yeah, I mean,
because that's a political issue right now as well, or has been.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Climate is definitely changing.
Yeah.
There's no question. There's lots of variables to that climate change, including human damage. And so if you take a look at global warming as a concept, which is what Al Gore kind of
focused on.
They called it global warming at the time, and then they had to rename it climate change because actually a lot of areas of the world are not warming and they're doing weird things, and the temperature differentials across the planet are doing really bizarre dynamic things that are pointing to something other than just CO2 in the atmosphere, which we probably don't have time to get into entirely, but it has to do with actual geothermal dynamics of the Earth itself. So the Earth, well, let me just give a short answer. So
baby version.
Earth is going through a major metamorphosis right now, irregardless of human existence, let alone behavior. And those changes have to do electromagnetic field of the Earth itself. So when I was born, the North Pole magnetically favored North America, and so above Canada there was this foci of magnetic field that we called the North Pole, and you would pick up a compass and it would point you there, and it was roughly to the North Pole, but it was actually northern Canada. That North Pole has moved dramatically over the last 30 years. And so now it's over in Siberia. So it's across the North Pole and it's over there. And so you think you pick up a compass and you're like, oh, certainly it's showing you the North Pole. Well, it's never showed you the North Pole.
Okay.
It's never showing you that tip of the axis of the Earth's spin. The magnet of the Earth keeps moving. And every couple 100,000 years, it goes through a complete reversal where the South Pole becomes the North Pole, North Pole becomes the South Pole. The speed of change of that pole right now has got a lot of people concerned that we're about to go through a reversal. If that happens, then we can't even imagine the changes in dynamics on the Earth, which has happened many times, so the Earth will be fine. But it's going to change coastlines in ways we can't even imagine if that were to happen. Right now, we don't know if it will go through complete reversal. It's certainly possible because I think the last one was a couple 100,000 years ago, so it seems on track to, but we're certainly seeing the movement of the magnetic field of the Earth. And that, during a movement of the North Pole magnetically, you get these extremely chaotic patterns where there's no longer just the really well-ordered double torus of the planetary geology. You now get this weird, super chaotic pattern that I think matches what we call climate change very well. Where some places are flooding that have never flooded. Some places are drought. Some places are hot. Some places are cold. We're getting freezing in Atlanta at times we've never seen it freeze before. Snow in Atlanta and the thing. So the strange weather patterns match that rather than just like some linear growth of heat. And so when we really sit back and ask ourselves, is our learned experience global warming due to CO2 in the atmosphere? The answer is no. It's not. It's not matching that pattern at all. So CO2 in the atmosphere is dwarfed by other problems in the atmosphere that are produced by our chemical industry, such as methane and things like that. And that's largely coming from natural gas, not that. So the whole effort to get off of fossil fuels and oil and go over to natural gas sounded like it was going to be our new green energy. But the amount of methane that is being produced through our natural gas industry that's leaking into our atmosphere is actually far worse than any carbon offset we would have gotten from the advantage of over oil.
This is all so politicized. It's hard to really.
Too.
All right, so we've got this question mark around climate change. We have.
Well, let me emphasize before people walk away thinking we don't have a problem. Climate change is happening. It's got a lot of factors. Deeper than that, I think we can start to say that the problem that humans are creating is a decline in metabolism of the planet and therefore human biology and all other biology on the planet. So we've accelerated through our behavior. We've contributed to a 10,000-fold increase in the rate of extinction on the planet over the last 50 years.
Wow.
And so that 10,000x on extinction events of species is what we need to escape, because right now we're online to go extinct over this next 100 years or so at our current biologic collapse rate. And so we've got a very short amount of time to re-understand this issue of the planet, and we need to stop thinking about the problem as a chemistry problem, which is what the whole CO2 story is arguing. We have a chemistry problem. We have a biology problem, and that's much more integrated of a solution set that we need to go after rather than just demonizing one molecule. We need to come to terms with the fact that it's death of complex ecosystems through chemical agriculture as a primary driver. That's really fundamentally at the foundation of why climate crisis is happening, why extinction crisis is upon us. And so we need to develop a much more holistic understanding of the 9 partitions that drive extinction. And of those 9, we've passed 6 of the 9 to guarantee that we are in the midst of a massive extinction event that is not reversible. So now we have this short amount of time to rethink our relationship to the earth and Earth's relationship to human in time to see nature recover this, which she can. She's very fast to heal.
Which was my next question. Are we going to be able to recover if we're 100 years out? Like, are we going to be able to recover?
Nobody knows. Is the interesting thing. We're a lot of people think we're past the 50-50 threshold, so 50% likelihood of us getting through this. I personally think that it's 100% likely that we get through, but it's going to be achieved in ways we can't even probably imagine. And it's the children on the earth right now that already know what that future looks like. And so we need to very quickly let go of our politicalization of these issues, and we need to start to empower our children to dream our future. Khalil Gibran, 100 years ago, one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century, was asked, how should we parent? And he said, we need to make sure that we never make our children think like us, and we should strive every day to think more like our children. And so we need to empower our children, saying, you came in right now, and if you're a soul that showed up right now, you must be part of a movement, a transformation, a reimagining of a future that we can't see yet. And so let's start empowering the dreaming of children. Let's start empowering our own dreaming as children. I can find the child in me still. And when I do dream like a child, I can shake off the limitations of, well, that's impossible. Well, that's never been done. Yeah. Those, it's a pipe dream. And I can start to dream bigger. And I can start to realize if I can feel the future in my body, then it's already here.
I love this. And I want to wind it back to health. Like, if we put our finger at 1940, what happened to human health from 1940, fast forwarding to today? Can we mirror like what we've seen in the healthcare landscape and the healthcare space with what we're seeing kind of with the planetary, frequencies and rhythms and stuff like that? Are you seeing those two things kind of go hand in hand?
Yeah, so the crisis of today started in the late 1800s probably, and what happened, that's when really the Industrial Revolution really got its foothold with trains. And so when trains really became a normal mode of transportation, it shrank the world. Technology started to really accelerate around the globe at that point, and during that process, by the 1940s, the Great War had really accelerated a lot of technologies on the planet. And so the World War II and the innovations there, and World War I just before it, we had seen the innovation. We'd gone from horse and buggy to jet aircraft in 50 years. Like, what?
Crazy.
The heck?
Yeah.
Like, that's it's an insane amount of innovation that happened during that time, which begs the question of, like, how does human ingenuity happen? Like, how is that even possible? We've been here 300,000 years, and then we go from a horse to jet aircraft. Like, what happened? And so we need to maybe touch on that at some future conversation, but the fact is that did happen. There was something that touched human ingenuity at that point, or the human imagination, or human information, that allows us to suddenly, pop our head above some previous normal and become something radically different. In that journey, right in the 1940s, we were at an incredible balance point of deciding our future as a species. There was groups of scientists that were discovering how nature was working within biological systems to cure cancer and all kinds of things through natural phenomena.
There were.
Absolutely. Royal Rife was a phenomenon, in and of one man's name, but he really was representative of an entire scientific, group that even was present by the late 1800s. So as the Industrial Revolution emerged, Dr. Koch was, I think, one of the powerhouses, Koch. Koch was arguing with Pasteur in the late 1800s over the issue of microbes and the concept of infection and germs. And so Louis Pasteur was arguing that humans are embattled against nature, and nature is trying to attack us. And if a bacteria gets inside of us, then we get sick and we die. And so the immune system must be a battlefield for sterilizing the human body. And Koch was a brilliant scientist and observer, and he was just like, that's not fitting my experience. He's like, I'm studying indigenous people in cultures that have no, industrial water or clean things, and they're living better and healthier than we are in these cities. By the late 1800s, cities were toxic.
Yeah.
And the life expectancy had gone way down because of the phenomenon of these, kind of nascent urban spaces where suddenly everybody's crammed together. Disease was through the roof. The water systems didn't work, and so the people were drinking their own feces basically. And so there's so much tuberculosis and called consumption at the time, and lots of these kind of infectious cholera and all this. And so we had created a disaster biologically by pushing people into these nature deficit spaces. And then we started to innovate to try to band-aid that with technologies like, by the 1940s, penicillin. And so here we were creating an unhealthy ecosystem for humans to live in, and then we were creating Band-Aids and saying, well, the Band-Aid's going to fix it.
Right. Without
ever addressing the fact that, no, it's actually the environment that was creating the sickness. Life expectancy was like 48 years old in the U.S. in end of the 20th or 19th century, end of the 1800s. And so by the 1950s, 60s, we suddenly have this life expectancy of 70 years, and we're like, oh my gosh, these technologies are going to fix everything. But really what had happened is we had started to, demand changes be made in child labor, and a lot of the death that was keeping our average age at 48 wasn't because people weren't living long. It was because children were dying at such high volumes. And that was largely because of our toxic city centers. So as we cleaned up municipal water, when we went ahead and started putting chlorine in swimming pools, we eliminated polio overnight, because the kids were all getting polio in the summertimes in swimming holes in post-World War II era. We didn't have a polio epidemic until we did urban dwellings and urban centers in that post-World War II era. Then we created an epidemic, and then we said that we fixed it by the polio vaccine. But really what we did is we went and cleaned up the water system so the kids stopped getting polio in the water holes in the summertime. But anyway, we have a lot of this like subterfuge of like environmental things happen, and then we get disease, and then we change environmental things and people get healthy. And instead of recognizing that environmental effect, we instead are looking for, well, what did we do to the human? What did we do that caused any of that? And so we have this long problem of seeing human disease as a human problem instead of an expression of the relationship of that organism back to its ecosystem. And that's where we're now at with genetics, is realizing, oh my God, to be human is to be the most complex ecosystem on the planet. Our species actually holds more microbial diversity than any other species on the planet. Therefore, we produce more energy per cubic centimeter. Therefore, we produce more intelligence because we have more data inputs into our brain than any other species on the planet. And so the data inputs that are necessary for intelligence to occur actually occur in the gut lining. So when we talk about the microbiome, this isn't just like soil to feed you. This is the soil that's making you think. Your ideas are literally coming as an amalgamation or a co-creation from the diversity within you. And as you decrease the diversity inside of an intelligence, their creative juices go down.
Interesting.
A single course of antibiotics for a human will take you into a 17% increase in major depression. 2 courses of antibiotics in 12 months, 44% increase in major depression.
Wow. We don't talk about this at all.
Don't talk about it. And so your neurologic intelligence, behavior, adaptation, capacity for creative thought relies on the ecosystem within you. And as we start to imbue our entire food system by the 1970s with these chemicals that are potent antibiotics, we started to undermine soil health globally, which undermined plant health globally. And then the plants were carrying the residues of the antibiotics. We would eat those, and our mitochondria started disappearing by the 1980s.
So did we get dumber?
Yeah.
We did.
For sure.
From the 1970s on.
From the 1800s on.
From the 1800s on.
A good way to do this, I think you can probably find it still on if you Google this, but if you look up 8th grade education or 8th grade final exam, 1880, there's no college kid coming out of college today that could pass that test.
Really?
The complexity of the philosophy, language skills, mathematics skills that were in 8th grade education in the 1880s is not taught in our schools anymore.
We're thinking we're so ahead and savvy and all these other things. So going back to health for just a second, I want to see if I have this right. It sounds like we've gone from an environment of infection and disease to then one of a metabolic crisis, which is all the cardiac stuff, weight gain, obesity, all of that stuff. Now I feel like we're transitioning to one of mental health and cognitive decline. Would you tie that entire spectrum?
Yeah.
Infection, inflammation, cardiometabolic, weight, now to this global cognitive decline, right? In our children, we're seeing sensory processing disorder, ADD, ADHD, autism, and, the population in between. We have anxiety and depression. We have dementia of all kinds. We have a problem cognitively that people are struggling to find solutions to. We blame technology. We blame family units. We blame so many different things. Is it really just all back to the microbiome?
It's one graph. I can show you the entire last 50 years of human disease in a single graph. So if we have a vertical axis on the graph of metabolism, which means light energy per cubic centimeter produced by mitochondria.
Right.
And then along the lower one, we have years from 1976 to 2025 here. During that, what is that? You got 50-year process there. In those 50 years, we started in 1976 with widespread use of glyphosate in the form of Roundup, and we were using Roundup in our farms and within a couple of years in our backyards and in our driveways as a weed killer. And so the famous Roundup molecule that you now find in any hardware store in the world, you'll go and probably every garage in the world has got a bottle of Roundup, and that Roundup has an active ingredient called glyphosate. So glyphosate starts entering our water system and our food system in the 1970s. By 1981, the first symptom of a declining metabolism globally is obesity. Obesity is a phenomenon where you have the same number of calories, but you can no longer burn the calories because there's fewer mitochondria per cubic centimeter to turn that back into light energy. And so with that inability to convert to light energy, the human cell is like, oh, there's too much fuel sitting here. We're going to have to send that back to the liver. And so instead of burning it in the cells are sending the energy back to the liver, unable to use it because the mitochondria are the bottleneck of energy production or conversion from CO2 or from long-chain carbon back into CO2. And so obesity happens as we start to store fat in the liver. The very first biologic consequence in the endocrine world is an increase in insulin resistance, which is a decrease of function of insulin to move those carbohydrates into the cell. So now you got a double hit. Not only do you not have enough mitochondria to get the glucose into light, you don't have enough insulin function to get the glucose to the mitochondria. So the mitochondria are now starving, and the human is overwhelmed with sugar and calories because they can't get it to the mitochondria. So by the late 1980s, we've got a diabetes epidemic coming on. As the light energy declines in human biology, the first system to really start to dysfunction is the most energetically demanding, which is the immune system. The immune system in any organism is always the most demanding energetically because, like I mentioned earlier about cities, the more organisms you have in close relationship, the more energy you demand to maintain healthy relationships. And so you need stoplights and you need things, and like there's so much communication, intercommunication necessary. The immune system is not a battleground. The immune system is an arbiter of complex relationships between tens of thousands of species. So as the immune system starts to lose its metabolic energy, you start to misbehave and you start to become reactive. When you don't have enough energy for maintaining a healthy relationship, you get inflammatory. This happens in human relationship, politics,
everything.
Across less energy, more inflammatory. Your rhetoric gets more inflammatory. You have short fuse. You get angry easy. All your coping mechanisms are shutting down. So that's what's happening in an immune system as the energy. So by the early 1990s, allergies started hitting you. So suddenly the immune system is reacting to stuff it's never reacted to before. Gluten sensitivity really came online in 1992. And so in 1991, we started using Roundup to dry crops, not just weed killer. We started spraying wheat directly in 1991. By 1993, we have widespread global gluten sensitivity, which is actually glyphosate poisoning. Because suddenly we were spraying the wheat days before harvest with a chemical that would be at very high, logarithms higher residues than if you had just sprayed the weeds near the crop.
Right.
And so now we have direct crop treatment by the early 1990s with Roundup-like compounds. And so with that advent, we started to see huge, deep injuries in the immune system, which would, by the mid-1990s, rear its head as autoimmune disease.
Right.
Now you're not reacting to the weed outside your body, you're reacting to your own body. By 2000, 1 in 4 girls in the United States has autoantibodies to her own thyroid gland.
Yep.
And so we are, systematically destroying our own organ system by 2000 with our own immune system due to the confusion of this lack of coherent communication. In the meantime, the second most neurologically, or the second most energetically intense system behind the immune system is the neurology. And so here's the rearing of, right in the late 1990s, autism goes through the roof, Alzheimer's in women, Parkinson's in men, attention deficit disorder, mood disorders, major depression, anxiety disorders at rates never seen before. As the neurologic toxicity continued to climb by the early 2000s, we see the emergence of chronic pain syndromes, chronic fatigue syndromes, and the rest. And so this is a continued decrement in the amount of energy available per cubic centimeter for a human to do its work. And it's very predictable. We should have seen this coming a long time ago. By 2006, we've got 95% of corn globally being grown as genetically modified Roundup Ready crop. And so now we're in the billions of pounds per year being used globally. And at that point, we see such a decrement in mitochondrial function that we start to see the cancer epidemic rear its head. And so we see leukemias, lymphomas, liver cancer, bladder cancer, thyroid cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, all going through the roof in the 2000s.
It's all connected.
It's all the same equation. And so as we see the cancer thing come and go, by 2010, we have such high residues now that the mitochondria inside the egg of a woman can no longer achieve conception. The mitochondria inside the sperm of the male can no longer have enough energy to swim upstream to find the egg. And so we have a massive explosion of infertility by 2010 globally.
Which we're seeing actively
it's
day in and day
getting worse
out.
by the day. By the late 2000s, I was an endocrinologist at the time working in fertility clinics. We were suddenly seeing this explosion of infertility, and IVF became a sudden
standard
normal,
of care.
And so by 2010, 2012, standard of care in the United States. Every year since then, we've seen this declining success of IVF. And so now women are going for 4 or 5 in vitro fertilization attempts before they can get pregnant. And so the reason is because even if you've now taken in a test tube and made those sperm and egg find each other, you still can't solve for the problem of conception. Conception of a human is the most beautiful, brightest thing that happens in the universe, and I can't overemphasize the magnitude of this scientific reality. So far, I've been describing to you the decline of mitochondrial function or metabolism in humans, and that's based on each human cell having about 200 mitochondria in it. Think back to your biology textbooks. How many mitochondria did they tell us was in a cell? 2 usually. There's like 2 little mitochondria floating in there, and they could do a cross-section of one of them so you could see it was a double-walled bacteria. There's 200 mitochondria inside of every human cell. Unless it's a neuron, then there's 2,000 mitochondria in the head of every neuron. And so it takes so much energy for a cell to do its work, and it's crammed full of these bacteria that are reproducing independent of the human cell. And so the bacteria in a thriving organic system of a human body, you've got 200 mitochondria per human cell, 2,000 in a neuron, and then the egg comes along. And the egg of a woman has 500,000 mitochondria in it.
Wow.
The egg of a woman has 500,000 generators of sunlight. And at the moment of conception, they discharge light. So this is called the zinc flash, and it blinds the microscope. But you can find it on Google. Google this zinc flash conception, and you'll watch a video of this lightning bolt that comes out of the egg at the moment of conception. It's that lightning bolt that I believe entangles a soul to a cell. And you have to have this huge light event to get the physics to bind an identity to the cell. And this is something that modern science ignores completely, is that each body has its own identity, which is very annoying because the biology is the same. My DNA is the same as your DNA. How the hell do I know at every single cell level that I am different than you? And if I put any of my cells inside your body, you'll kill it immediately because you see it as foreign. What's creating the identity of the freaking cell is this deep secret, and I believe it's not in the biology, it's in the physics. At the moment of conception, this massive discharge of light allows a soul to entangle. And so when we start to see these deep, deep disorders of fertility, which are now driving us to a point of extinction, and not just in the United States. I've been in Saudi a lot recently, and Saudi Arabia is now publishing its own data at 68% infertility rates.
Wow.
And so
68%?
68%. And so we are reaching this threshold of inability to produce babies globally. China to Saudi to US, U.S.'s population, so if you go below a birth rate of 2.1, then you're destined to disappear as a population. The United States is a 1.6 right now. And every tenth of a point, you're taking off decades of survival for the species. And so at 1.6, the U.S. population has gone in 100 years. So we've got this very rapid declination in human reproductive because the light energy per cubic centimeter in the egg of a woman is starting to be challenged by the amount of chemical that egg is exposed to on a daily basis. And meanwhile, nobody's talking about it, and everybody's complaining about 0.04% of our atmosphere being CO2. This is the problem with politicizing science, is we will spend half a century going down the wrong avenue for solutions that are irrelevant to the biologic outcome of humans or the planet while we go extinct.
So we have this massive global infertility crisis. Is that the bottom of this decline that we're talking about with human health?
Unfortunately, it's not. And we've seen, a phenomenon that we could not have imagined, but was actually prophesied by a lot of indigenous cultures over time, was that we would actually see the dissolution of gender. And that's the next metabolic step below infertility. And
it was predicted?
Yes, very much so. And so there's an understanding that the masculine and feminine would lose its polarity, and therefore we would start a new human species at that point, and so we would rebirth out of the dissolution of this polarity by finding our way to this crisis point. And so we have found our way to that crisis point. And so by 2010, the fetus and even adults at the time, but playing out in the fetus in ways we haven't even seen fully come to fruition yet, the process of moving from neutral, which is where every fetus begins, to a masculine or feminine expression of male-female, requires an enormous amount of energy, because you're taking an organism that's at this nice neutral, every cell's the same, everything's predictable, to suddenly trying to polarize it one direction or another into a masculine or feminine expression. And if there's not enough energy per cell at that time, you can see this failure to completely gender. And that plays out in the nuclei of the brain more than anyone else, because there's so much energy required at the neurologic system, 10 times more than a peripheral cell that might be, the cell of a breast or the cell of, a prostate or whatever future tissue is going to be male, female. The neurons are requiring an enormous amount of energy to distribute energy to grow certain neurons large if it's going to be a male, certain neurons large if it's going to be female. And it's, I think, that neural differentiation where we start to see this emergence of gender neutrality. And so this situation that we're in, where we've got two generations of people now that are largely not identifying as either or. We keep thinking that's a social crisis, and there's certainly social overlays and social programming that can be a way in which to interpret this, but we actually have a biologic problem, not a social problem. And so the biology deteriorated by 2005, 2010, such that a high level of the fetuses developing weren't able to gender fully. And so then we end up with this kind of neutral state of behavioral traits where the person in the brain is being told this is how a male functions and feels the world. And they're like, well, I look biologically male, but I'm not feeling, I'm not neurologically interpreting the world as male. I'm looking at women and I understand the female there and I vibrate in that frequency. I must be a female. The reality is a lot of people will do sex changes and everything else, which is, I oversaw a lot of that as an endocrinologist. Every sex change, in trans community is dependent on the endocrinologist to provide the hormones and do all that stuff to make the transition. But what I saw over and over again there, and what we see playing out, I think, socially, globally, is you can make the sex change, but it doesn't actually change your neurology. And so in the end, you find that you're still in some sort of neutral state. You may have changed your outward appearance, but your biology is still in this lovely neutral space in some ways. And so I don't think we need to change anything necessarily biologically. We need to acknowledge what's happened biologically, and then acknowledge that we could move past this by increasing the metabolic potential of each organism on the planet again, starting with the plants that we grow, which becomes the food we eat, which becomes the neurons we create with. And so this meeting at the center point of the masculine and feminine is a necessary part of our journey, which I find quite fascinating. If we were going to survive, we were going to have to end this male-dominant, control the nature thing, control one another, own everything, because everything's scarcity. We got kicked out of nature, therefore we need to control nature. that whole wounded masculine psyche that comes out of every human, male or female, the wounded masculine within us believes we got kicked out of nature. So we run around with this literal abandonment disorder, and we now know biologically and chemically that if you create an abandonment disorder in any organism, a mouse in the cage or a human, that abandonment sets that organism up for severe addiction. And so humans are addicted to everything right now, not because we're dumb, but because we have an abandonment disorder. And our abandonment disorder is from nature itself. And so we even created our religious paradigms, the Garden of Eden, then we got kicked out because we weren't good enough, or we sinned, or somehow we weren't going to fit the, make the mark. So at the moment you get kicked out of nature, now you're against it, and now you come at it with this, kind of adversarial effect, and you're prone to major addiction to something. And so we're all addicted to our work or to substances or whatever it is. And for this, we're missing the bigger point of we only have one human problem. It's nature deficit disorder. And that nature deficit disorder has led to this decline of metabolic function because we kept separating ourselves with our technologies from nature itself, and ultimately from the concentration of light energy. So the path forward is exciting. We created the path down, and now we know the path out.
Well, let's talk about the path out, because I think for anyone, watching or listening, it's a little heavy. It's a very different way of thinking about health and human disease. It's a very different way of thinking about our existence. I have long thought that the gender issue is biochemical in nature, and that's really where it's beginning. How do we, if it's the mitochondria not getting the energy it needs, how do we help our own mitochondria, the mitochondria of the planet? What do we do? What are our starting steps? Where do we begin as the individual, and then as a family, and then as a community? What do we need to do?
The solution came to me actually at the same time the problem surfaced. So I left the university in 2010 and started my own clinic, which led to my own laboratory. And by 2012, we were starting to study soil because we were recognizing the nutrition that we were feeding in our nutrition center wasn't working like the data said it should. And so I was basing my clinical practices of a plant-based diet on the data that had come out for 30 years from Cornell and Cleveland Clinic and these huge, academic centers that created an incredible amount of data around the use of plant-based diet to reverse diabetes, reverse cardiovascular disease, reverse cancer. And so I was applying all of that science, and it just wasn't getting traction in a significant portion of my patients as it should. So that got me starting to study plant nutrient density, which quickly got us into soil sciences. And there we uncovered a beautiful fact, which is something that I hold as really a tenet of nature now, which is she has never allowed an injury to occur that she didn't already have a solution for. It's impossible. Because had there not been a solution for adversity, life would have never happened. This is an adverse, friction-filled universe.
So there's hope.
And so there's not only hope, there is a 100% reality that nature is going to engineer herself out of this crisis. Now the only question is, do we want to stay in play as humans? And if so, we just need to quickly align ourselves with her predictable metabolic recovery process. And a metabolic recovery process is achieved by the increasing the number of interconnected relationships in nature. And so we've got to take ourselves out of these sterile boxes of houses. We need to get our children out in rivers and lakes that are not chemically poisoned. And we need to start building our food system on soils that are regenerative, that are imbued with these relationships across the microbiome, from bacteria to fungi and the rest. And so we found that solution. We were able to show by 2013 in my lab, we were able to show that we could completely reverse glyphosate damage at the cellular and metabolic level by reintroducing soil extracts from fossil soils. And so that would become the dietary supplement line called ION, or Intelligence of Nature.
Yes.
And so what we can show is that a tiny amount of glyphosate, so the residues that would be in this cup of tea that I'm drinking right now, you're somewhere between, we're in Atlanta, so you're probably somewhere around 10 to 15 parts per billion as glyphosate in this cup. And so with that, my cellular biology is diminished in its mitochondrial potential. But just half an hour before getting here, as I was leaving the hotel, I sprayed a bunch of ion in my mouth, and that soil extract is accelerating the light energy produced by my mitochondria at such a rate that that little bit of glyphosate no longer does any damage. In fact, it actually makes me stronger. And this is where you know you're getting back into a biologic threshold of regeneration when injury actually stimulates repair to a point of strength rather than weakness. And so this is what we should see. This is why you go to the gym. You go to the gym, you destroy millions of muscle cells by stressing it under the weight of something. You go run down those flight of stairs, you cause thousands or if not millions of tiny little fractures in the bone from that weight-bearing pounding exercise. Both the gym and the bones after the run down the stairs start to regenerate and start to rebuild such that your bone has higher density at the end of the day than before you ran down the stairs, and you have more muscle at the end of the week than you did at the beginning of the week because you stressed the cells. So stress, when it's used in the threshold of biologic response, is always a good thing. So we can get the glyphosate in our environment actually to access exercise for our future biology if we have enough information and enough resources, carbon resources from the soil. And so that's what we're showing with ion is within seconds of that ion touching the cell membrane, the cell immediately remakes the tight junctions that are damaged by glyphosate. Tight junctions are the Velcro between our cells. When you damage those, you get leaky gut, leaky brain. And so when you put the communication network and resources back to the human cell, it automatically does what it needs to do, which is to recreate healthy boundaries. Healthy boundaries are then followed by increased metabolism at the cellular level. And so within minutes of taking these soil extracts, you see your body's ATP production going through the roof, not only back to normal, but actually higher than it was before the injury. And so in a beautiful way, nature has provided not only the solution for the repair, it's giving us an opportunity to move past any biologic potential we've lived before. We will come out of the glyphosate era stronger than we've ever been if we put enough nature back between us and the glyphosate.
So I love ion biome and we use it all the time in practice. We use it here in the house. It's probably sitting on the table somewhere out there. And we have noticed that you can notice the instant increase in energy. But are there other ways to do that as well? Just from a individual standpoint? I mean, I know food quality, all these other things make a difference, but if ion biome or soil extracts are one, what are maybe two other super efficient ways to regenerate energy, to improve sort of the ATP, the light energy, chi, all these things, all these different things and ways we have of describing it?
So the first step, what we saw, and by 2013, we started getting these products on the market, is that this was going to have to be a Band-Aid because there's not enough of this fossil soil extract to actually let us keep doing what we're doing. Right now, we've killed 97% of the Earth's soils through chemical agriculture. If we keep doing that, we will run out of the antidote.
Right.
And so we need this soil of today to become the soil of yesterday. We need to start generating such potent soils that every bite of food and every drink of water is carrying these molecules in it again. These molecules are made by diverse ecosystems. So diverse species, diversity within the bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and the like are creating these millions and millions of different variants of these little carbon molecules that function as the liquid circuit board for communication. Redox chemistry is this technical name for that. And so that liquid circuit board is being created by diverse ecosystems. And so we hope we put our entire supplement line and the entire supplement industry out of business over the next 30 years because the concept of dietary supplementation is ludicrous. Like, nature's been feeding itself for billions of years on this planet. It wasn't waiting for humans to come along to supplement nutrition. We needed the supplement industry to come along when we completely denuded our food system of nutrients. And so right now, the entire, $500 billion supplement industry is a Band-Aid on top of a dying food system. So by 2018, we realized we got to do something about this because farm fields all over the place, organic or otherwise, weren't performing at the levels that we're going to recover this metabolic crisis that we just described. So we launched a nonprofit called Project Biome. And the concept of Project Biome is rewilding nature systems to increase the number of communication networks and number of relationships in nature. And then regenerative agriculture as a system for allowing soil systems to return to this level of intelligence and opportunity for repair. And then reconnected economies, when we start to allow bioregional economies to surge again. bioregional economy is a description of your wellness financially should depend on how healthy is your ecosystem locally. Therefore, you should be eating from your system locally. You should be actually stimulating industry locally. And we know this. We see signs up at every retail shop.
Right.
Hey, shop local.
Yep.
Don't give it all to the 5 people that own all the stock of Starbucks or whatever it is. So that eat local mindset is a symptom of this deep knowingness that if we would return to the village, if we would return to village dynamics of macroeconomics, we would have a very stable economy again. And so we don't necessarily have to go backwards in time. We need to go forwards in time to a new village model where we understand that human biology and our metabolism is equal to the soil metabolism, it's equal to water metabolism. And now we need to start benchmarking our local economies against the success of our local environments. And then we can play those off with each other. One biosphere within the middle of the United States should actually have overlap and interaction with the biosphere economics of those around it. And pretty soon North America, with Mexico, U.S., and Canada is not 3 countries, but it's 15 biospheres that are communicating economically and energetically to raise the vibrations so that children can be a possibility again, so that gender can be a possibility again. And so this is where I think I get excited. It's pretty simple. It's rewilding, increasing the number of indigenous species in an environment. Is regenerative agriculture where we stop chemically destroying the ecosystem, allow complex biodiversity to return, and then a reconnected economy that honors that recovery system. And so that we started in 2018, and we realized that it was too complex to really reach each household with that message. So we started Farmer's Footprint.
Okay.
And Farmer's Footprint is our outward effort with Project Biome, because Project Biome is mostly working with governments and industry to really align those issues. But every household can do Farmer's Footprint. So Farmer's Footprint is this wonderful Japanese proverb that we pulled this from. But the proverb is the best fertilizer for a garden is the farmer's footprint. And it was the realization that if every household will get their shoes off and start walking in nature again, specifically in their backyards or on their porch or in their community gardens, and start to be directly interacting with soil, their health will immediately recover. And so my clinic...
Just interacting with
nature.
Not like planting things or doing things.
That's exactly what you would love to do, is start moving from walking in the garden to planting the garden. And in 1945, we had a very high level of health. We'd gone to an average age expectancy of 70, 72 or something like that. And so we had this great recovery of life expectancy and everything else by the 1940s. And at the end of World War II, 1945, not just the U.S., but the UK and all the Allied forces, those countries were all growing 45% of their food system in their backyards. We called them victory gardens. We understood that victory was only going to occur if we had food sovereignty. This is the United States problem right now, is homeland security has been boiled down to how big can we build defenses and how high can we make the tariffs.
Right.
That's not a healthy system. The healthy system would be, where is food sustainability in the United States? And the answer is 0. We have no food sovereignty in this country anymore because we grow an enormous amount of stuff, corn and soybean everywhere, but that never ends up on a human plate. You can't actually eat GMO corn or soybean. It's too toxic and it doesn't even taste good. It doesn't produce food, so we have to turn that into chemicals. So we do high fructose corn syrup, we do ethanol for gasoline, we do plastics for our clothing industry so that everybody can wear plastic yoga pants. It's just this generative engine of energy, but it doesn't end up as food. And so for that, the United States is extremely vulnerable, and really every city system in the world is extremely vulnerable to humanitarian crisis and biologic collapse, because our food system supply chains are now measured in thousands of kilometers. And we're extracting those food systems on slave labor pricing from developing economies. And so the United States is fed by South America, Europe is fed by Africa, Middle East is fed by Africa and parts of Asia. And so it's slave labor for thousands of years to produce food when food is not seen as the foundation of life. And so we need major change in socioeconomic systems that start in your household. So you can immediately become part of the solution by joining this Farmer's Footprint movement. If you go to the Farmer's Footprint website, farmersfootprint.us, and also in Australia, we've got a big org there as well. So you can plug in, and we have free content and cheap paid content too, that will take you through the 101 of how you turn your backyard, Kentucky bluegrass lawn into a food forest to start creating health sovereignty and food sovereignty for your own household. At the community level, starting to get engaged in community gardening. I'm on the advisory board for Denver Urban Gardens, which is now really a template for the whole country, and they're now teaching their systems of community garden management to 26 other states now. But it's a phenomenal example of how urban settings can start to create food sovereignty within these small pockets. And even a small amount of food grown in your backyard or community garden has a huge ripple effect into your own biologic health and vitality. Wow. And so this is the grace of nature, that it takes such a little bit of her to start to restore your relationship to her. And so welcoming back a mint plant onto the countertop in your kitchen or into the windowsill. A single mint is hard to kill. Mint's like your magic. If you don't think you can grow food, go buy a mint plant and find out that you can keep it alive. If you just take a leaf off of that, even better, bite the leaf off without picking it, because there's actually more energy in that way. That all of animal life around the world grazes on living food. We're the only animal that goes and picks it and lets it die, and then we eat it. So a little bite of mint off that plant daily actually retrains your body to remember what generative food and generative water feels like and tastes like. And so you can start to retrain your brain, retrain your biology into this direct relationship to nature through just a single plant growing. Let that be your inspiration then. If you've got a backyard, tear that thing up next spring. Get rid of the grass and start planting a whole food forest in your backyard. Get the kids out there. Any kid that doesn't like a vegetable is simply a kid that's never grown a vegetable. You get the kid planting a seed and suddenly a tomato plant comes out, they're going to eat the baby tomatoes and they're going to love them. Yeah. And so the child needs to understand where its food comes from again. Most kids don't know where a carrot comes from today. And a lot of kids don't actually know what a carrot pulled out of the ground looks like, because they've only seen these little things that look like a baby finger that got milled in the processing as a carrot. So we're so divorced from nature now that our children are suffering to the metabolic crisis that they're in. We got to reconnect. And so get engaged locally, community. Farmers markets, I'm really delighted, are starting to crop up in every community globally now, from Africa to Europe to South Asia. You can find them everywhere. And so that's going to be what the future looks like. When our farmers are known, we know their name, we volunteer in their farms on the weekends so the kids can feel what a big working farm feels like and what soil smells like when compost is getting into it. And that whole technology is healing. It's where the biologic recovery will begin, is this more interconnected social system of reconnecting nature to humans.
And that will heal the planet?
Everything.
What do you think will happen geopolitically when it comes to health and when it comes to the planet?
Yeah, so there's two different futures that are emerging. One is a technocratic future where we rely on computer chips planted in our brains to symptom manage our declining neurology and artificial joints, and we're infusing everybody with peptides to symptom management. Peptides will never heal a human being. Peptides will never create health. Probiotic will never create a healthy gut. These are symptom management tools that are making billions of dollars for the pharmaceutical industry. Don't sell yourself short on nature. Nature intended you to produce your own peptides. Don't get stem cells from some other quantum being. If it's getting stem cells injected in your body from a fetus that's not you, that's confusing the hell out of your own biology at that point. Because maybe your biology will allow a stem cell to produce a cell, but if it's quantum entangled with a different soul, I stand on the fact that that is confusing to a human body, and it's going to force an inflammatory reaction over time because it's not self. And so we need to get away from this external pursuit of health, and we need to become internal generators. And so my 8-week program is called The Journey of Intrinsic Health, because it's really my 30 years boiled down to a nutshell of it can only happen inside of you. You're the only pathway to your own health.
Wow.
There's nobody that can add a single technology that's actually going to make you biologically more complete. We're so biologically, energetically, metabolically complete at the moment of conception that you became you. That level of intelligence will be thousands of years in the future if we even get scratched. We are so far from our technology mimicking the intelligence of a single human cell, let alone the symphony of 70 trillion cells. You can't even calculate. There's no technology that's going to help you. You need to come in line with the original math that designed you. And to do that, you have to integrate back into nature in a deep way.
Powerful. I don't think we can end this at any better place. I think it's a message of hope. Unfortunately, we have walked a journey that has made us sick, made our planet sick as well. But I think if we can all come together and turn it around, then we can have a different outcome for sure. It has been an amazing conversation. You always blow my mind every time you come on, and probably want you back for part 3 just to dive deeper into some of these ideas. But for anybody watching or listening today, where can they find you?
My main education website is Zach Bush MD, zachbushmd.com. You can keep an eye out for my book that's coming out that will encompass a lot of this stuff. So it takes iteration and repeating this information in yourself, because it's opposite of almost everything you've heard over the last 40 years. So the book is there to really give us a grounding rod to say, okay, let's begin again on our understanding of science and where it is. So that book is called Human, and it comes out soon. So you can tie in there and start to really think through how you're going to rebuild your family unit and your community and everything else around this understanding of metabolic force as our future, or only our future. Intelligenceofnature.com will find you to the soil supplements and help bring all of those resources. There's a gut supplement, an incredible skin supplement that reverses the aging of the skin. Both ones functioning as this kind of nature antidote to the current chemistry of our planet. And then there's a whole line of botanicals that are now available for sleep, for immunity, for brain focus, and those are nourishing the mitochondrial and metabolic pathways necessary for those different organ systems to return to these high metabolic states. So intelligenceofnature.com there. journeyofintrinsichealth.com. You can find your way to our coaching program for practitioners. We train doctors, nurses into all of this science, and it's far beyond the science. It's really the lifestyle that allows the support of this science to happen within a single individual. And so that practitioner coaching program is available. It's a 4-month training program. We're certified coaching, certified by the International Coaching Federation on that. For consumers out there and families that need help and support, we have the 8-week program, which is an immersion in really reintroducing your own biology to yourself. And that's a process of reintroduction of core self, that core identity that knit you together in your mother's womb. And then we reintroduce you to food, water, breath, fasting, movement, play, community, through these new lenses of self, and helping you tie back into your intrinsic knowingness of where your health path lays. And it's a little different from each person, but it's a beautiful experience because it's group immersion. So you've got 7 other people that are witnessing your healing journey. And it's only through the witnessing that you actually heal. If you try to go heal by yourself, you actually get sicker over time, not less sick. And so you have to be in community to really fundamentally heal.
Wow.
And it's so powerful when we empower each other, not as doctors and nurses, but as a small community. What if we could heal each other by being witness to one another? And we're taking that to the extreme with our immersive experiences. And so you can go again, Zach Bush MD, keep an eye out on my website and social media for the immersive experiences that happen a few times a year around the world. And that is a radical kind of reset of human biology through changing the sacred geometry inside the water crystal of human cells through somatic work that we do for 7 days straight together in magnificent parts of nature to get that nature immersion and re-energizing the original design of human.
Fascinating. So there's no reason to begin somewhere with all those different options. And I want to thank you again for being here. I ask every guest this question, but I think I already know the answer. You know, the show is really about bringing science and spirit together, and you talk about it so well in everything you just discussed. But when it comes to you, Zach Bush, what makes you whole?
I'm working on that. This has been my biggest challenge, and maybe this is part 3 for you or something like that, because it's it's the most intensely beautiful and challenging thing I've ever done. It started about 4 years ago. I was taking the Course in Miracles, and it blew apart my whole concept of human relationships. And one of the human relationship metrics or matrices that I held most sacred, which was that of marriage, suddenly seen through that lens, I realized we have done something unnatural to human relationships. We have broken the fundamental natural law within human dynamics, and for that we see all the stress within human relationships. And never before has it been more high, this extreme level of stress with relationships right now. And I think it's because nature is forcing us to reevaluate not just city systems. We got to focus back on what does it mean to be me. And so for the last 4 years, I've been following that Course in Miracles journey into what they call holy relationship, which is this completion of the masculine and feminine within myself. And there's no greater challenge that I've ever faced, because it triggers everything that you didn't want to face as a human, which is the possibility of loneliness. What if love is scarce? What is, it takes you through all these layers of fears, guilts, and shames that you have been programmed with. And this slow detox of all of those matrices has been the most magnificent thing I've ever pursued, the most challenging thing I've ever pursued. And it's really is the keystone, or maybe it's the key in the lock for how we're going to survive as a species, is completing ourselves.
Completing yourself. You're going to have to come back and tell us what you learn from that journey next. All right. For everybody watching and listening to this episode of Whole Plus, thank you for being here. I have been so inspired by this. I hope you guys have as well. And I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening and watching today's episode of Whole Plus. Be sure to share this episode with your friends and family. And if you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to this podcast on YouTube, or click the follow button on Apple, Spotify, or wherever it is that you get your podcasts. And don't forget to follow me on all social channels at Dr. Taz MD. Until next time, stay healthy and stay whole.